Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. What happens when a joke goes too far and my laughter strips the last bit of dignity from our home? How did my husband, so calm and quiet, turn my harmless fun into lawful consequences that no one, not even me, saw coming? I used to think I could talk my way out of anything, but today I opened the door and found the evidence stacked against me, with my name on every line. My name is Evadne Hartley, and I'm 34 years old. I work as an office manager at a mid-level marketing firm, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was married to Caleb, a high school teacher who seemed perfectly content with his quiet, predictable life. Too content, if you ask me. While I craved excitement and social validation, he was happy grading papers and reading books on Friday nights. That's where Jasper Lowe comes in. Jasper was Caleb's old college friend who managed the hottest bar in our downtown area. Unlike my husband, Jasper was charismatic, loud, and thrived on attention. He made me feel alive in ways that Caleb's gentle, methodical nature never could. When Jasper invited us to his bar's anniversary party, I saw it as my chance to break free from the boring wife image I'd been trapped in. The music was pounding, the drinks were flowing, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not Caleb's quiet wife, not the responsible office manager, but Evadne, fun, spontaneous, magnetic. Jasper had been flirting with me all night, and I loved every second of it. The attention, the laughter, the way other people looked at us with envy. "You're too good for that boring husband of yours," Jasper whispered in my ear as we danced. The alcohol made his words feel like truth instead of betrayal. "Don't I know it?" I laughed, spinning around to face him. That's when it happened. A playful slap across my backside that sent shockwaves through the crowded bar. Instead of being offended, I burst into laughter. The sound was loud, genuine, and completely uninhibited. "Jasper," I squealed, but I was grinning from ear to ear. "You're terrible." The crowd around us erupted in cheers and wolf whistles. Someone pulled out their phone to capture the moment, and I posed dramatically, one hand on my hip, the other pointing accusingly at Jasper while I continued laughing. It felt like performance art, like I was finally the star of my own show instead of a supporting character in Caleb's quiet drama. That's when I saw him. Caleb stood near the bar, his face pale and his jaw clenched. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, but a cold, calculating disappointment that made my stomach flip. But the moment passed quickly. The music swelled, Jasper pulled me back into the crowd, and I pushed my husband's reaction to the back of my mind. This was my night, and I wasn't going to let his uptight sensibilities ruin it. When we got home that night, Caleb was silent during the entire car ride. I tried to fill the space with chatter about the party, about how much fun it had been, about how we needed to get out more. He just stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Come on, Cal," I said as we walked into our suburban 2-story home. "It was just harmless fun. You're being way too dramatic about this." He turned to look at me then, his brown eyes searching my face. "Harmless?" "Yes, harmless." I threw my purse on the kitchen counter and kicked off my heels. "God, you're so serious about everything. It was a joke, Caleb. People were laughing. I was laughing. When did you become such a killjoy?" "When my wife started letting other men humiliate her in public," he said quietly. The words hit me like a slap, but I wasn't about to back down. "Humiliate me? Are you kidding? I was having fun for the first time in months. Maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as Jasper does, I wouldn't have to..." "Wouldn't have to what?" His voice was deadly calm. I realized I was about to say something I couldn't take back, so I pivoted. "Look, I'm not going to apologize for enjoying myself. If you can't handle your wife being social and popular, Maybe that says more about your insecurities than my behavior. Caleb stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Maybe it does, he said, and walked upstairs without another word. The next morning, I woke up feeling vindicated. I'd stood my ground, refused to be shamed for having a good time. As I got dressed for work, I noticed something on Caleb's dresser that hadn't been there before, a small silver key that I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it over breakfast, he just shrugged. "New filing system," he said, not looking up from his coffee. But there was something in his tone that made me uneasy, something that suggested the key was more significant than he was letting on. That afternoon, I did something that would prove to be my first real mistake. I posted the party photo online. The picture showed me mid-laugh, Jasper's hand still raised from the slap, my face glowing with mischief and alcohol. I tagged everyone involved and added the caption, "Some people know how to have fun. Sorry, Queen energy, no regrets." The likes and comments poured in immediately. Friends from work, old college acquaintances, even some family members chimed in with laughing emojis and fire symbols. I felt powerful, validated, like I was finally showing the world who I really was beneath the suburban wife facade. When Caleb came home from school that evening, I was still riding high on the social media attention. I showed him my phone, scrolling through the dozens of positive responses. "See, people get it. People understand that life is supposed to be fun." He looked at the screen, then at me, and that same cold expression crossed his face. "Congratulations," he said. "You've officially made our private business public entertainment." "Our private business? It wasn't even about you, wasn't it?" He set down his briefcase with deliberate precision. "When you're tagged as my wife in a photo where another man is putting his hands on you and you're laughing about it, how exactly does that not involve me?" I felt a flicker of doubt, but I pushed it away. "You're being paranoid and possessive. This is exactly why I need friends like Jasper, because at least he doesn't make me feel guilty for existing." Caleb nodded again, that same slow, thoughtful nod from the night before. "I see," he said, and disappeared into his study. That night, I heard the sound of papers rustling and drawers opening and closing. When I went to investigate, I found the study door locked, something that had never happened in our 5 years of marriage. When I knocked, Caleb's voice came through the wood, calm and controlled. "I'm working on some lesson plans. I'll be out in a few hours." But I could swear I heard the sound of a printer running, and lesson plans had never required that much organization before. Over the next week, I doubled down on my newfound social media presence. I reshared the party photos, posted quotes about living authentically and not apologizing for being yourself. The validation was addictive. Every like, every supportive comment, every fire emoji felt like proof that I was right and Caleb was wrong. "You're glowing lately," my colleague Sarah commented as we grabbed coffee in the office break room. "New skincare routine?" "New attitude," I replied with a grin. "I'm done playing small to make other people comfortable." But not everyone was as supportive as I'd hoped. Harold, my boss, called me into his glass-walled office on a Thursday afternoon with an expression I'd never seen before. "Evadne, we need to talk about your social media presence," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. My stomach dropped. "My social media presence?" "One of our clients saw some photos you posted and expressed concern about the image it projects for our company. Now, what you do in your personal time is your business, but when you're tagged as working here..." The conversation was a blur of corporate speak about professional boundaries and company reputation. I nodded and smiled and promised to be more mindful, but inside I was seething. Even at work, I couldn't escape the judgment and pearl clutching. When I got home that evening, I was ready for a fight. I wanted to vent to Caleb about the unfairness of it all, to have him take my side against the world for once. Instead, I found him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, staring at a spreadsheet. "What's that?" I asked, trying to peek over his shoulder. He closed the laptop immediately. School stuff. But in the brief glimpse I'd gotten, I could swear I'd seen dates and timestamps, and what looked like screenshots of social media posts. My posts. Caleb, what was on that screen? Nothing that concerns you, he said, but there was something different in his voice. Something harder than I'd ever heard before. That night, I waited until he was asleep and tried to access his laptop. It was password protected, another first in our marriage. When I tried our anniversary date, our wedding location, even my birthday, nothing worked. Finally, in frustration, I tried boring, my frequent complaint about our life together. The screen unlocked immediately, and what I found made my blood run cold. There was a folder labeled Documentation containing screenshots of every social media post I'd made in the past month. Not just the party photos, but everything. My quotes about authenticity, my comments about living my truth, even my responses to other people's posts. Each screenshot was dated and timestamped with obsessive precision. There was another folder labeled Communications that contained screenshots of text conversations. My text conversations. With Jasper, with my friends, with my family. Somehow, Caleb had been monitoring my phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the evidence of his surveillance. How long had this been going on? How much did he know? The sound of footsteps on the stairs sent me scrambling to close the laptop and pretend to be asleep. Caleb appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the hall light. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked quietly. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady, but I could feel him watching me. After what felt like an eternity, he retreated back downstairs. I heard the study door close and lock, and then the sound started again. Printing, organizing, the methodical rustle of papers being sorted and filed. The next morning, the laptop was gone. In its place on Caleb's desk was a locked drawer that definitely hadn't been there before. "Sleep well?" he asked over breakfast, his tone perfectly pleasant. "Fine," I lied, stirring my coffee with more force than necessary. "Good. I'd hate for you to lose sleep over anything." The way he said it, so calm, so knowing, made my skin crawl, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of admitting that his little spy game was getting to me. Instead, I spent the day at work researching phone security and digital privacy. I changed all my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication, and even considered getting a new phone entirely. If Caleb wanted to play games, I could play them too. But when I got home that evening, I found him in the kitchen making dinner as if nothing had happened. He smiled when he saw me, asked about my day, and chatted about weekend plans like we were a normal couple instead of two people engaged in psychological warfare. "I was thinking we could visit my parents this Sunday," he said, chopping vegetables with precise, even strokes. "It's been a while since we've done the family dinner thing." The thought of facing Caleb's parents, especially his stern father Richard and outspoken sister Lydia, made my stomach turn. But I couldn't think of a good reason to refuse without seeming suspicious. "Sure," I said. "That sounds nice." Caleb smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Perfect. I'll let them know we're coming." That night, I called my mother for support. Roxana Bell had always been my champion, especially since her own divorce 5 years earlier had made her suspicious of men who tried to control their wives. "He's tracking your phone," she said, her voice sharp with indignation. "Honey, that's not normal behavior. That's controlling and manipulative." "I know, right? He's acting like I committed some terrible crime instead of just having fun at a party." "Men can't handle it when their wives have any independence," she continued. "Your father was the same way. Always making me feel guilty for having friends or going out without him. Don't let Caleb make you small, Evadne. You're too good for that." Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. By the time we hung up, I felt vindicated again, ready to stand my ground against Caleb's increasingly weird behavior. But as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something that made my confidence waver. There was a small piece of tape on my phone case that hadn't been there that morning. When I peeled it off, I found a tiny device underneath, so small I almost missed it. Caleb was in the study again, door locked, printer humming. I stood in the hallway holding the tracking device, my hands shaking with rage and something that might have been fear. He wasn't just documenting my digital life, he was tracking my physical movements too. The game was escalating, and I was starting to realize that my quiet, boring husband might be more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Sunday dinner at the Hartley family home was a disaster from the moment we walked through the door. Richard Hartley, Caleb's father, greeted us with his usual stern handshake and formal pleasantries, but I could see the disapproval in his eyes. Eleanor, Caleb's mother, tried to maintain her role as family peacemaker, but even her warm smile seemed strained. The real problem was Lydia, Caleb's 28-year-old sister, who had apparently seen my party photos and had opinions about them. "So, Evadne," she said as we gathered around the dining room table, "I saw some interesting pictures online this week." The way she said interesting made it clear that she meant something else entirely. I forced a smile and took a sip of wine. "Oh, you mean from Jasper's party? That was such a fun night." "I'm sure it was." Lydia's tone was ice cold, especially for Jasper. "Lydia," Eleanor warned, but her daughter was just getting started. "I'm just curious, Evadne, when you were posing for those photos, laughing while another man put his hands on you, did you think about how it would make Caleb look? Or were you too busy thinking about yourself?" The table went silent. Richard cleared his throat and focused intently on his roast beef. Eleanor looked mortified. Caleb sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "I think," I said carefully, "that you're reading way too much into some harmless fun between friends." "Harmless?" Lydia's voice rose. "You tagged yourself as Caleb's wife in photos where you're letting another man humiliate him publicly, and you call that harmless?" "No one was humiliated except in your imagination," I shot back. "Maybe if you spent less time judging other people's relationships and more time working on your own social life, you'd understand that married people are allowed to have fun." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was tired of being attacked by his family. Lydia's face flushed red, and Richard set down his fork with a sharp clink. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd spent 40 years as a high school principal. "Evadne, you're a guest in our home, but that doesn't give you the right to speak to our daughter that way." I was defending myself against her accusations. "What accusations?" Richard's eyes were steel grey and completely unsympathetic. "She pointed out that your behavior reflects on our son. That's not an accusation, it's a fact." I looked around the table desperately, hoping for support from Eleanor or even Caleb. But Eleanor was staring at her plate, and Caleb was watching me with that same cold, calculating expression he'd worn all week. "I think," Caleb said quietly, "that we should probably head home." The drive back was silent except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream at all of them. At Lydia for her self-righteous judgment, at Richard for his old-fashioned ideas about marriage, at Eleanor for not defending me, and especially at Caleb for sitting there like a statue while his family attacked me. But more than anything, I was angry at myself for letting them make me feel small. That's why, when Jasper texted me later that evening about another gathering at his bar, I didn't hesitate to say yes. "I'm going out," I announced to Caleb, who was reading in the living room. He looked up from his book. "Where?" "Jasper's having some friends over. I could use some time with people who actually enjoy my company." "I see." He closed the book and set it aside. "And you think that's a good idea? After today?" "After today, I think it's exactly what I need." I expected him to argue, to forbid me from going, to show some emotion beyond that infuriating calm. Instead, he just nodded. "Have fun," he said, and picked up his book again. His lack of reaction made me even angrier. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing an outfit that was more provocative than anything I'd worn to his family dinner. If he wanted to treat me like I was invisible, I'd make sure other people noticed me. The gathering at Jasper's bar was smaller than the anniversary party, but the energy was just as intoxicating. Jasper greeted me with a hug that lasted longer than it should have, and I didn't pull away. "Rough day?" he asked, his hand still on my waist. "You could say that. Your friend's family thinks I'm the devil incarnate." "Their loss," he said, his eyes traveling down my body appreciatively. "You look incredible tonight." The compliment hit me like a drug. When was the last time Caleb had told me I looked incredible? When was the last time he'd looked at me the way Jasper was looking at me now? As the night progressed, I found myself gravitating toward Jasper, laughing too loudly at his jokes, letting him refill my drink, allowing his casual touches to linger. When someone suggested taking photos, I posed with my arm around his waist, my head on his shoulder, my smile bright and defiant. "Post that one," I told the photographer. "Make sure you tag me." By the time I got home, it was past midnight and I was riding high on attention and alcohol. Caleb was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with manila folders spread out in front of him. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes taking in my disheveled appearance and flushed cheeks. "Good time?" he asked. "The best," I replied, kicking off my heels with more force than necessary. "It's amazing how much fun you can have when you're not worried about other people's uptight opinions." "I'm sure it is." Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. The folders on the table were labeled with words I could barely make out from across the room. Financial, property, personal. "What are you working on?" I asked, moving closer. He began gathering the folders with methodical precision. "Just organizing some paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" "The kind that needs to be organized." He stood up, folders in hand. "I'm glad you had fun tonight, Ivadne. Really, but this isn't funny anymore." The way he said my name, with such finality, made something cold settle in my stomach. As he walked toward his study, I caught a glimpse of something taped under one of the folders, a small USB drive labeled Archive A. "Caleb, what—" But he was already closing the study door behind him, and I heard the now familiar sound of the lock clicking into place. I stood alone in the kitchen, suddenly feeling less triumphant than I had moments before. The house felt different somehow, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Upstairs, as I got ready for bed, I checked my phone and saw that the photos from tonight were already online. I looked good in them, happy, carefree, alive. Jasper's arm was around me in most of them, and we looked like a couple celebrating something wonderful. The likes and comments were pouring in again, but this time, I noticed something different. Mixed in with the fire emojis and supportive messages were other comments, more critical ones from people I hadn't expected to hear from. My sister Lynn had written, "Maybe think about how this looks before posting." A colleague from work had commented, "Yikes, girl, be careful." Even some of my friends seemed to be questioning my choices, though they were too polite to say so directly. But the comment that made my blood run cold came from an account I didn't recognize. "Your husband deserves better." I tried to trace the profile, but it was completely anonymous. No photos, no personal information, no other activity. Someone had created an account specifically to send me that message. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of printing and organizing coming from the study below, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The game I thought I was winning was turning into something else entirely, and I was starting to realize that I might not know the rules as well as I thought I did. But I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. If Caleb wanted to play psychological warfare, I could play too. Tomorrow, I would figure out what was in those folders, what was on that USB drive, and what my quiet, methodical husband was really planning. What I didn't know was that by tomorrow, it would already be too late. The cracks in my carefully constructed narrative began to show on Monday morning. I arrived at work expecting the usual supportive comments about my weekend photos, but instead found an atmosphere of awkward silence and averted eyes. Sarah, who had always been eager to chat about weekend adventures, barely acknowledged me. When I tried to show her the photos from Jasper's gathering, she glanced at them quickly and mumbled something about being busy with a project. By lunchtime, I realized that people were actively avoiding me. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. Colleagues who had previously included me in their social plans suddenly had excuses for why they couldn't make it to happy hour or weekend events. The isolation was suffocating, but I refused to admit that my behavior might be the cause. Instead, I doubled down on my victim narrative. People are so judgmental, I complained to my mother during my lunch break. You'd think I committed murder instead of just having fun with friends. Don't let them shame you, honey, Roxana replied, but even her support sounded less enthusiastic than usual. Although, maybe you could tone it down just a little, for your own sake. Tone what down? Being happy? Being social? Being myself? No, of course not. I just meant, well, some of those photos were pretty intimate with that Jasper fellow. People talk, you know. Even my mother's wavering support felt like a betrayal. I hung up feeling more isolated than ever. That afternoon, Harold called me into his office again. This time, his expression was grimmer than before. Evadne, we've received more complaints about your social media activity. I'm going to need you to either make your accounts private or remove any references to working here. More complaints? From who? I can't share that information, but I will say that this is becoming a pattern, and patterns have consequences. The threat was clear, even wrapped in corporate politeness. I nodded and agreed to his terms, but inside I was furious. How was this my fault? How was I responsible for other people's small-minded reactions to my perfectly normal social life? When I got home that evening, I was ready for a fight. I wanted to confront Caleb about his surveillance, his folders, his cold manipulation of our relationship. But the house was empty except for a note on the kitchen counter. Working late, dinner in the fridge. See. I ate alone, scrolling through my phone and trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The photos that had seemed empowering just days before now looked different somehow. More desperate, more obviously inappropriate. But I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Around 9 o'clock, I heard Caleb's car in the driveway. I positioned myself in the living room, ready to demand answers about his spying and his mysterious paperwork. But when he walked in, he was carrying a briefcase I'd never seen before, and wearing an expression of such complete emotional detachment that my prepared speech died in my throat. "How was work?" he asked, as if we were strangers making polite conversation. "Fine," I lied. "How was yours?" "Productive." He set the briefcase down carefully and looked at me with those calculating eyes. "I had some interesting conversations today." "About what?" "About documentation, about evidence, about the difference between what people say happened and what can be proven to have happened." The words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. "That sounds very philosophical." "It is, actually. For instance, someone might claim that their behavior was harmless, but if you have photographs, timestamps, witness statements, and digital records proving otherwise, the truth becomes much clearer." He was talking about me, about my photos, my posts, my nights with Jasper, but he was doing it in such a detached, clinical way that it felt like listening to a scientist describe a lab experiment. "Caleb, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about accountability, Evadne. I'm talking about consequences. I'm talking about the fact that actions have meanings, whether we want them to or not." He picked up his briefcase and headed toward the study. "Oh, and Lynn called earlier. She wanted to warn you about something, but I told her you were busy. I'm sure she'll try again tomorrow." The study door closed and locked behind him, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and growing panic. I tried calling Lynn immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting her, but got no response. Whatever she wanted to warn me about would have to wait until tomorrow. That night, the sounds from the study were different. In addition to the usual printing and organizing, I could hear the low murmur of phone conversations. Caleb was talking to someone, multiple someones, based on the number of calls, but I couldn't make out the words through the locked door. I pressed my ear against the wood, trying to catch fragments of conversation, but all I could hear were occasional phrases: documented evidence, timeline established, witness statements confirmed. It sounded like he was building a legal case. But a case for what? The next morning, Caleb was gone before I woke up. In his place was another note: early meetings, see you tonight. C. The formality of the note, no love, no honey, just his initial, felt like a death knell for our marriage. I spent the day trying to reach Lynn, but she didn't answer my calls until late afternoon. Evadne, thank God, she said when she finally picked up. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this. Tell me what? Caleb came to see me yesterday. At work. He had copies of everything. Photos, text messages, social media posts, everything you've been doing for the past month. My blood turned to ice. He what? He wanted to know if I'd seen your behavior change, if I'd witnessed any of the incidents he had documented. He was so calm about it, so professional. It was like talking to a lawyer. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that you've seemed different lately, more reckless, more focused on this Jasper guy. I'm sorry, but I couldn't lie for you, not when he had so much evidence. The phone slipped in my sweaty palm. Evidence of what? I haven't done anything wrong. Evadne. Lynn's voice was gentle but firm. You've been posting photos of yourself with another man, staying out late, letting him touch you in public. You've been acting like you're single. I am not having an affair. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Come on, sis, you know what this looks like. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the office parking lot, trying to process what Lynn had told me. Caleb wasn't just documenting my behavior, he was building a case against me. He was gathering witness statements, organizing evidence, preparing for something that would require legal-level documentation. Divorce. He was preparing for divorce. The realization hit me like a physical blow. For all my complaints about our boring life, for all my fantasies about independence and excitement, I had never seriously considered that our marriage might actually end. Caleb was supposed to be the stable one, the one who stuck around no matter what. The idea that he might leave me had never entered my calculations. When I got home that evening, I was ready to grovel, to apologize, to do whatever it took to fix things. But Caleb wasn't there. Instead, I found a manila envelope on the kitchen table with my name written on it in his precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. Tomorrow, 9:45 a.m., downtown. You'll understand soon. No signature, no explanation, just coordinates and a time. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, but got no response. For the first time in our marriage, I had no idea where my husband was or when he was coming home. As I sat alone in our house that night, listening to the silence where his methodical sounds used to be, I finally understood what Lynn had been trying to tell me. The game was over. Caleb had been playing by different rules all along, and tomorrow I would find out what he had won. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house made me jump, hoping it was Caleb coming home so I could explain, apologize, fix whatever I had broken. But morning came without any sign of him. At 9:30 a.m., I stood outside a downtown law office, my hands shaking as I stared at the address from Caleb's note. The building was sleek and professional, the kind of place where serious business happened, the kind of place where marriages ended. I didn't go in. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my car across the street, watching the entrance and trying to convince myself that this was all a misunderstanding, that Caleb was just trying to scare me into better behavior. At exactly 9:45, I saw him emerge from the building carrying a leather portfolio. Even from a distance, I could see the satisfaction in his posture, the confidence of someone who had just accomplished something important. Our eyes met across the street. He stood there for a moment, perfectly still, then raised his hand in a small wave. Not a greeting, a goodbye. I drove home in a panic, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe he was bluffing. Maybe this was just an elaborate scare tactic designed to make me appreciate what I had. Maybe if I deleted all the photos, apologized to his family, cut contact with Jasper, we could go back to the way things were. But when I walked into our house, I knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. The air felt different, emptier somehow. Caleb's coffee mug wasn't in the sink. His briefcase wasn't by the door. His reading glasses weren't on the side table where he always left them. I ran upstairs to our bedroom and found his closet half empty. Not ransacked or hastily cleared, but methodically emptied of essentials. His favorite shirts, his good shoes, his travel bag, all gone. On his side of the bed was another envelope with my name on it. Inside was a key, the mysterious key I'd seen on his dresser weeks ago, and another note. Check the study. You deserve to see what you've accomplished. The key unlocked the drawer that had appeared in his study. Inside was a USB drive labeled Archive Final and a printed inventory list that made my stomach drop. The list was organized by date and included 47 screenshots of social media posts, 23 saved text message conversations, 15 photographs from various social gatherings, 8 witness statements from friends and family, 4 professional complaints documented through work, 3 recorded phone conversations, legally obtained, 2 character references from colleagues, 1 complete timeline of behavioral changes. Each item was numbered, dated, and cross-referenced with supporting documentation. I plugged in the USB drive with trembling hands and found myself staring at the most comprehensive documentation of self-destruction I'd ever seen. Caleb had organized my downfall like a research project, complete with folders, subfolders, and detailed annotations. There was a folder labeled Social Media Evidence, containing every post, every photo, every comment I'd made over the past 2 months. Seeing them all together like this, stripped of context and arranged chronologically, told a story I didn't want to acknowledge. The story of a woman systematically destroying her marriage for social media validation. Another folder, Communications, contained screenshots of my text conversations with Jasper, messages I'd forgotten about, flirtations I'd dismissed as harmless, complaints about Caleb that looked devastating when presented as evidence. The witness statements folder was the worst. Lynn's account of our conversations, Harold's documentation of workplace complaints, even Eleanor's reluctant admission that she'd noticed changes in my behavior during family gatherings. But the most damning folder was labeled simply Pattern. It contained a detailed timeline showing how my behavior had escalated over 2 months, from innocent social media posts to increasingly inappropriate public displays. When laid out like this, it looked like the systematic breakdown of a marriage, which, I realized with growing horror, is exactly what it was. At the bottom of the inventory list was a handwritten note in Caleb's precise script. Divorce petition, filed 9:30 a.m. Process server scheduled for 2 p.m. It ended the moment you laughed. I looked at the clock. 1:45 p.m. I had 15 minutes. 15 minutes to figure out how to undo 2 months of documented self-destruction. 15 minutes to craft an explanation that could counter a USB drive full of evidence. 15 minutes to save a marriage I'd spent 8 weeks systematically destroying. I tried calling Caleb, but his number was already disconnected. I tried calling the law office, but they wouldn't put me through to him. I even tried calling Jasper, thinking maybe he could help me figure out how to fix this, but his phone went straight to voicemail too. At exactly 2 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I sat frozen in the study, surrounded by the evidence of my own destruction, listening to the sound of official papers being served. The process server knocked 3 times, called my name, and then I heard the rustle of documents being left on the doorstep. After his car pulled away, I opened the door to find a thick manila envelope with my name typed on a legal label. Inside were divorce papers, temporary restraining orders, and a complete copy of everything I'd just seen on the USB drive, now submitted as evidence in a legal proceeding. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and public humiliation as grounds for divorce. It requested division of assets, spousal support limitations, and, most devastating of all, a restraining order preventing me from contacting Caleb directly. As I sat on my front steps reading the legal documentation of my marriage's end, I saw neighbors peering out of windows, probably wondering why a process server had been at the Hartley house. The gossip would start immediately and spread through our social circle like wildfire. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The evidence speaks for itself. Your belongings will be collected tomorrow. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. C. I tried to respond, but the message wouldn't go through. He'd blocked my number. That evening, as I sat alone in a house that no longer felt like home, I finally understood what Caleb had been trying to tell me all along. Actions have consequences, choices have meanings, and sometimes, by the time you realize what you've lost, it's too late to get it back. The worst part wasn't the divorce papers or the evidence, or even the restraining order. The worst part was that everything in those files was true. I had laughed when another man humiliated my husband. I had chosen social media validation over my marriage. I had prioritized my own entertainment over my husband's dignity. And now I was sitting alone with the receipts of my own destruction, finally understanding that the quiet, boring man I'd dismissed as weak had been strong enough to walk away when I proved I wasn't worth staying for. The next morning brought more than just divorce papers. As I sat in the kitchen trying to process the legal documents spread across the table, another knock came at the door. This time, it wasn't a process server. It was a moving truck. 3 men in uniform shirts began efficiently removing items from my house under the supervision of a woman with a clipboard who introduced herself as Caleb's legal representative. Mrs. Hartley, I have a court order authorizing the removal of Mr. Hartley's personal property and any jointly owned items specified in this list. She handed me another set of papers. You're welcome to observe, but please don't interfere with the process. I watched in stunned silence as they dismantled our shared life with professional efficiency. The good furniture, the wedding gifts from his family, the books, the electronics, everything that had made our house feel like a home disappeared into the truck. But they weren't just taking furniture, they were taking evidence. I watched them carefully package Caleb's computer, his files, even the printer from his study. Every tool he'd used to document my behavior was being preserved and protected, probably for use in the divorce proceedings. The photographs on the walls, the legal representative said, consulting her clipboard. Any that include Mr. Hartley or his family members. They stripped the house of every photo, leaving bare walls and nail holes. My mum, Roxana, didn't comfort me. She told me to get a lawyer because this was real legal trouble. Then the story leaked online, screenshots, texts, even divorce quotes, and the comments shredded me. By evening, my job put me on leave for reputational damage, and clients were backing out. Jasper's socials showed he'd already moved on, and even my family told me to stay away because they were embarrassed. Alone in the empty house, I finally got it. What I called harmless fun had turned into documented betrayal, and Caleb's quiet, lawful patience let the evidence finish me.